Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 50 best episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, this video is part of a series of videos where I cover every episode of Star Trek The Next Generation one season at a time. Of course, I have finished my coverage. I have done all 7 seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation. So in order to celebrate that, commemorate that, or just whatever, I'm going to count down my top 50 favorite episodes of Next Generation. This is a list I compiled as I just did this recent rewatch. I wrote down a rating for every episode between 1 and 10, and then I organized those in order of, my favorite to come up with this list, which I think is the 50 best episodes of Star Trek Next Generation. Of course, this is just my opinion. It may differ from yours. It may differ from popular opinion. This is just my opinion after rewatching the episodes, which ones I like best. So I'm here to count it down. And so this is kind of in celebration, it's a continuation of my coverage of Next Generation. Therefore, I am basically just going to talk as long as I feel like it. This isn't meant to be concise or short, or more out there for the random person to come by. And if that's not what you're looking for, then that's fine. Don't watch this video. That's your option. But I'm telling you, this is for me just to ramble on as much as I like. If you would like a shorter version, more concise, I did a video like several years ago with my top 10 favorite episodes of Next Generation. It's going to be different than this top 10 here because I've, watched it more recently and changed my mind a bit. But if you want a more shorter, more concise video, you can check that out. I'll put a link in the description below. This one will go on for as ever long as I damn well please. And that's that. I also did a top 30 worst Next Generation list, but this is where I'm going to get more positive. I'm going to get into the best episodes of Next Generation. These are my personal favorites in my opinion. Cool, so as I said, I gave each episode a rating between 1 and 10 and grouped them together as per rating. So we'll start off with the 8 ratings, which is extremely good rating. And I'll have a little card flash up on the screen to show you what rating the following episodes I'm about to talk about have. So let's go ahead and get into this. Cool, so let's go ahead and kick things off with my number 50 favorite episode of Star Trek Next Generation, and that is The Chase. This is a 6-season episode where you got the Cardassians, the Klingons, the Romulans, and the Enterprise all chasing after this huge artifact that's supposed to be put together into a DNA puzzle that dates back trillions of years, and or billions of years at least. And it's about, they think it's going to be powerful, it's a weapon, it's an energy source. Turns out it's just the humanoids who originally seeded the whole galaxy. It's filling in a plot hole, kind of like Rogue One did for Star Wars, where it says this is why everyone looks human, or at least humanoid form, because there's this ancient alien species that had the humanoid form that seeded their seed throughout the galaxy, and that's why there's a bunch of humanoids around. I usually don't like the whole thing about filling in plot holes, particularly the Enterprise when they did it with the, this is why Klingons had flat foreheads. Like, that pissed me off. But this one I like. This one I will buy. And plus, I just think it was a cool episode. It was a good character story for Picard. Got into his mentor with archaeology, and he yells at Troy, which I think is awesome. And it's just cool seeing like a chase between all these different alien races in one episode. It's pretty cool to see. So, let me now move over into my number 49 favorite episode of Next Gen, and that is Where Silence Has Lease. There we go, a 2nd season episode. Not too many of them are going to be in here. But yeah, where silence has lease. I actually always liked this episode. I thought it was effectively creepy. Now this is the episode with Nagilum where the Enterprise finds itself in this void and all this weird shit keeps happening. They see like Yamato and then no one's on board, and Riker and Worf being on board, and they see duplicate copies of the bridges. Basically Nagilum's just fucking with them, treating them like rats in a maze, and then he wants to kill off half the crew, and we get a really good like philosophical discussion between Picard and fake Data and Troy that were just projections of Nagilum trying to trick Picard, which is actually a really good philosophical discussion. I thought was really great, where Picard talks about the possibilities of existence and what death means, and how Picard would rather just destroy the ship than let Nagilum get away with killing half the crew. I liked it. I thought it was really effective. It was really creepy throughout, and it's one of the better second season episodes, in my humble opinion. So, let us now move over to my number 48, which is Firstborn. So this is a 7th season episode. It's basically Alexander from the future time travels to the past, but you don't learn this till the end of the episode, so you think it's just some Klingon Ketmar or whatever the fuck he's called, like telling Alexander to be more Klingon. But I actually thought it was a nice twist that it was Alexander from the future, because Alexander wasn't Klingon enough, and because of that Worf died and he felt guilty about it, so he traveled back into the past to try to force Alexander to become more Klingon so that Worf wouldn't die in the future. I do wish that the canonical Star Trek kept more with this timeline rather than that bullshit they did with Alexander and Deep Space Nine, but there were some non-canon novels that redirected course and made it come back to this timeline where Alexander eventually becomes the Federation master, but neither here nor there. I thought it was an interesting episode. Honestly, most of the episode I thought was kind of boring, although Quark makes an appearance, was always a lot of fun. And it wasn't that boring, actually, because there's an interesting chase where they're trying to find out who the Duras sisters are trying to kill Worf, but they find out it's just a ruse from this guy who's Alexander from the future. I thought that was a really interesting plot twist. So yeah, decent episode, very good. Anyway, we will get into my number 47 on my list, which is the first duty. The first duty of every Starfleet officer. It features a really great Picard speech. It's probably my favorite Wesley episode. This is the episode where Wesley is like most human, where he comes off as a real life character, not a caricature, not a whatchamacallit, Mary Sue who saves the universe every time. Like, I got so sick of that in the first couple seasons, and then when he appears in season 7 and he's like too angsty and over the top, fuck you, Mom, like that I didn't like. But this is the perfect, like, he felt like a real character. It felt like a real situation where he was participating in this daredevil stunt that went wrong and someone died and he's covering it up, and we follow like the Enterprise crew's perspective where they don't want to believe Wesley did something wrong, but he's trying to sort of he's trying to say, go away, stop helping me, because he's trying to hint at the fact that he knows he did something wrong. And Crusher and LaForge and everyone's convinced they're just going to prove his innocence, but he knows that they're just going to uncover more and find out he's guilty. And when Picard does, he gives that great speech to Wesley. I love Picard's speeches. So, yeah. I thought this was actually quite a powerful episode and worked really well. So, let me now get into my number 46, which is Force of Nature. A bit of a guilty pleasure for me, a bit of a nostalgia trip. Some people really don't like this episode. I love it a lot. Mainly because, like, I like the characters of the activists who come and try to warn people that the warp field is destroying their space. I think these are really well developed, realistic characters, and it really puts across what it's like to be an activist, what it's like to not be heard. Whereas, like, one is a bit more reasonable when Data and everyone's like, okay, we'll put in more research, whatever. She's like, what? That's your answer? More research? This is bullshit. You ain't doing shit. So she's willing to sacrifice herself in order to prove there's a danger, and prove there's a danger she does. And it makes for some really exciting, and I always talk about how I love the music in this episode. It always is something that always stuck with me. I can't think about this episode without thinking about the music of the da da. Like, it's just, to me, it's like some of the best use of suspenseful music I've ever seen ever in anything. And I really got like involved. I really felt like suspense. I felt on the edge of my seat. The Enterprise is fucked. They're stuck in this rift, and you had to die. And I thought it was a really exciting episode. I always really like it. So there you go. Anyway, we will now move over to my number 45, which is Redemption, parts 1 and 2. So this is this is like the culmination of the Klingon trilogy, the Worf discombination, where Worf finally gets his name back, hence the name of the episode, Redemption. Introduces Larson B'Etor. Has a very sort of interesting sort of cat and mouse situation. I love it to have the Romulan side to it, where the Romulans are helping the Dora sisters in this Klingon civil war, basically. And so Picard gets it in his head to they're not going to interfere directly with the civil war, but they are going to prevent the Romulans from interfering. And you have this interesting blockade, and you got Data as being the captain of one of the ships, was really cool to see. You got Worf and his adventure of learning what it's like to be a Klingon and reuniting with his brother, but then finding his own path at the end. Now, this episode is not higher. Maybe it might be high for some people, but I do have some issues with it, such as I didn't like the character of Sela. I thought that was a ridiculous concept that brought the episode down. And the ending where Worf was like, no, I will not kill him, I thought was kind of out of character. It didn't work for me. And also the Data's first officer, way too over the top. I did not buy him. It was way unrealistically asshole-ish. I was like, I don't think I'd be a good first officer for you. So those things kind of brought this episode down a bit, but still a really great episode. Still really exciting. Still a great way to conclude this Klingon arc. Alright, so now let me get into my number 44, which is Allegiance. And they give us food that Isok can't eat to make him a threat. So I enjoyed this episode a lot. I thought it was really an interesting episode where Picard is held captive, but then there's a replica of Picard on the Enterprise running around being all crazy, and there eventually Riker like puts him in his place and relieves him of duty because he can tell like he's putting the ship in danger, and it's just a really interesting journey to see Picard in this situation, trying to work with the other people who are captured, trying to figure out what's going on. And of course, in a true Picard fashion, he does and puts these aliens in their fucking place, which is always great to see. So that was a really good episode. So now let me move over to my number 43, which is Brothers. I really like. See, I'm usually shy away from the whole Data's extended family stuff because they went overboard with it. But I always gravitated toward this episode. In fact, I always thought it should be called Father-Son rather than Brothers, because it's more about Dr. Newly and Soon meeting with Data and Data meeting his creator, but then they bring in the aspect of Lore and him trying to reconcile how he abandoned Lore. And Lore basically, goes off the rails and steals his emotion chip and everything. I thought we had some really touching interactions between these three characters. It was a nice family reunion. It was a really exciting bit at the start of the episode. Although I do think it's a bit unrealistic and over the top how Data takes over the Enterprise or whatever. Yeah, that was a bit crazy that all Soon had to do is flip a switch and Data would turn evil like that. Not evil exactly, but but it was still exciting. It was still good stuff. And then they had the subplot of the two young kids who one played a practical joke and almost cost the other kid's life, and so they're, the brothers, and they can't reconcile, but they do reconcile. I always thought it was one of the most powerful moments when Data asks how come the two boys, they hated each other, now they're just playing like normal, and Dr. Crusher says they're brothers forgive, and they zoom in on Data, and he's just thinking about his own brother and how he kind of forgives Lore for what he did. I thought that was really powerful. Kind of undone by what they did in Descent, but good. Anyway, let's get into the next episode. My number 42, cause and effect. All hands abandon ship. Repeat. All hands abandon. Sorry. So this is another episode that's probably a lot lower than most people would have it. I've seen several examples where this has been in the top 10, top 5. I used to love this episode that much when it first came out, but I kind of think there's been a lot of stuff that's done time loops better since, because this is the first time I've ever seen the time loop storyline done. This is even before Groundhog's Day. Like when Groundhog's Day came out, I was like, oh, it's like cause and effect. But I think there's something interesting in its simplicity. How seeing them slowly like repeat the same day over and over again, but with slight differences when they slowly grow more closer to like putting everything together. That is interesting. But I will say it is a tad bit too repetitive, and I know it's a time loop story, it's supposed to be repetitive, that's the point, I get it, but I think it's too repetitive. I think there's been other time loop stories that have done the same idea but less repetitive, and it actually works better. Like they managed to keep things fresh, change things up a bit. And the main thing I hold against this episode very badly is the ending, where they have Captain Fraser show up and Picard's like, oh, we need to talk, and they just cut the credits, which is bullshit. You can't cut the credits. You had to find out, how were they there? Like, were they stuck in a time loop all this time? Because I don't believe that, because they would have figured it out, and because they seemed oblivious. So did they travel through a rift, kind of like the Enterprise C did in yesterday's Enterprise? Like, what's the deal? What's going on? And how are they going to react when they find out they're in the future? What are they going to do? And we didn't get any of that, which I feel like that was something very important that we needed to see. And instead of having that time loop, they could have gotten rid of one of those loops that was just repetitive and slimmed it back a bit to make room for this, which is super important. But so that always bugs me. But still a good episode, still a really great episode. Like, seeing is one of the most effective teasers that just starts off the Enterprise, explodes, and that's the teaser. And we go back and we see the Enterprise back to normal. Like, that is a hook. That is a very effective hook. And as I said, seeing like the Enterprise constantly blow up and get put back together, that's really, really cool. So I do appreciate this episode, maybe just not as much as some other people do. So let's move over to the next episode, my number 41, Disaster. This is one of the most effective sort of disaster stories. It is your stereotypical like disaster movie. I always call this the space earthquake episode, because it's basically like an earthquake movie where you have a disaster happen, you have groups of people trapped in different parts of the ship, and they had to work together to get through the various situations. I thought it was an interesting pairing they did, particularly with, Picard and the kids, which is just something season 5 did a lot, explored adult relationship with children. But it was a great way to sort of jump into how Picard's uncomfortable with kids, but how he was forced to like work with them in order to get through this crisis situation, how he kind of bonded with them. I actually thought that worked. But what I like better about this episode was the Troy and storyline with Ro and O'Brien, where they're kind of, Ro was pushing Troy to just jettison the star drive section and let it explode in order to save the people in the saucer section, but O'Brien was insistent that was cold-blooded and they could save the whole ship. And I love that storyline because no one's wrong. Like, Ro is not wrong. Even at the end of the episode where it's proved that they did save the whole ship, they very easily couldn't. I love how Troy even admits that when Ro was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was wrong," Troy's like, "You could have very easily been right." Like, they could have. She was risking like everyone's lives by trying to save everyone. So Ro was actually not wrong to push for what she did. She wasn't cold-blooded, but then you had the O'Brien who was pushing the opposite way, and of course it all turned out. But I thought that was really interesting. I really loved that aspect of it. It's one of the better uses of Ro, who's one of my favorite characters, by the way. Anyway, let me move over to my number 40, Future Imperfect. This is an episode I've always liked. When it first came out, I loved it. Maybe don't love it as much as I used to, because it hasn't aged well. There has been done better since, but it's still a really interesting concept. Of course, they throw you off the ball. They make you think Riker is woken up 16 years in the future and he's the captain. You see this future, but you find out it's all just a holodeck. You think at first it's the Romulans. They're tricking Riker to get information, but no, that's another fake out. It's just some orphan alien boy who is lonely and wants attention. And I like that. I think it was a sort of a heartwarming ending where Riker's like, "To me, you'll always be Jean-Luc." And so, yeah, that was cool. And I think the way they did the progressive fake outs where Riker was putting things together, like one of my favorite lines, of course, when he says the hologram version of Admiral Picard, he's like, "Shut up! Shut your mouth and stop talking." Great stuff. So yeah, always really interesting episode. Alright, so now let me move over to my number 39, which is True Q. I did a full-length review for this episode recently. It's, I think it's quite an underrated episode. I think it's a really powerful episode about a young woman who's about to enter Starfleet Academy, finding out that she's a Q. And Q's basically shows up. It's like, okay, let's go to the Q Continuum. That's it. And she's like, what? She doesn't want to uproot her whole life. She has friends. She has family. But then she's learning about her origins. Q's teaching her how to use her powers. You got trials and tribulations. And eventually she's like, all right, I agree never to use my powers ever again. And then she does, because Riker and everyone's life is at risk. She's like, I gotta accept I'm a Q, and I just gotta accept that. It was quite powerful. It was really touching. It was a great character story. I think it's one of I think it's one of the better Q episodes. I really like it. I think this one's really underrated. All right, so let me now move over to my number 38, Half a Life. This is the only Loxana Troy episode that will appear in any of my top 50s. Any of them, not just Next Generation, but also Deep Space Nine. Of course, all three Deep Space Nine Loxana Troy episodes appeared in my worst list for that show. And I had a couple, if you see my worst list for Next Generation, I got a couple Loxana Troy episodes in there. One was at number 2. This is, I think, the best Loxana Troy episode. She's not a character I particularly like or think works very well. I think this is definitely one of her better uses. She was not, I mean, she was kind of annoying in this episode, but she wasn't really annoying. It was an interesting concept, and I think it was a great character story for her, where she met this man that she fell in love with, but then he's part of an alien race that wants to kill off people at 60. It's part of their culture. It's part of the ritual that when you reach 60, you kill yourself. It's just the thing you do. And it's a really interesting look at people dealing with other cultures. And in this case, these aliens are isolationists. So any attempt to sort of fight back against this ritual was met very sternly. And that scene where you had Michelle Forbes, which is the first time she appeared on Next Generation, who plays Ensign Rowe, but she played Timmonson's daughter in this episode, appear and like basically said, show up and like, I'm ashamed of you, Father, because you're destroying our tradition. Like, that was a powerful scene. Like, this was really good stuff in the Loxana. Like, before, she always had like a retort to all this, oh, it's okay for young people to let people die at 60. But when his daughter showed up and like really hammered that down, like, she had no retort. Like, she knew she was going to give in, and the ending where she was willing to go and watch his death was really, really powerful. Now, I don't agree with their species, and I don't think that's the point. I don't think you're supposed to agree with this ritual, but it is what it is, and things are what they are, and you have to deal with the situation as it is, and it was a messed up situation. I do believe this alien race probably will be wiped out because of this stupid ritual, because they didn't let Timothy continue his work, and it kind of deserved to be honest. But, you know, I thought it was a great episode. So, alright, so let's move over to my number 37. This is another episode that will appear higher on most people's lists, and that is Family. I did really like this episode. I thought it was a great character story, great follow-up to Best of Both Worlds. I love how this is one of the best examples of Next Generation being kind of serialized with their emotional storylines, that they're not just going to pretend the events of Best of Both Worlds never happened, and it shows the toll that it took on Picard. At the same time, we get his interactions with his brother, and we also get other storylines like Worf with his foster parents, which I thought was really interesting to see, and Wesley sort of watching this message from his deceased father. Like, that was all interesting stuff. I really like this episode. As I said, it's on my top 50. It's all the way up to what, number 38? Did I say this was? So it's a good episode. I do really like it a lot. 37, sorry. Up to number 37. So I do really appreciate this episode. But I feel like a lot of people would put this in the top 10 and 20, which I do think it's the Picard with his brother storyline can get a wee bit boring, especially like the whole cancel the parade in your favor, like the way they're always antagonistic. Didn't feel that realistic to me, so I don't think this episode's a masterpiece like some other people may do, but it's still a really strong character story, and I appreciate very much the follow through and seeing how the events of Best of Both Worlds affected Picard. I can't understate how much I appreciate that. It's just not the best episode ever. Like, the through storyline is a bit dull, and the relationship with his brother can be a bit silly and over the top, but lots of great character stuff in here. As I said, the thing with Worf with his parents is also really great. I love that as well. So let's move over to my number 36, which is Sins of the Father. Getting back to the Klingon storyline of this is when Worf first gets discommoded. This is a really good episode. It shows like the kinship that Worf and Picard has. It was a great sort of through storyline where Worf is trying to prove his father's innocence, but they find out that his father is innocent. They're just setting him up in order to avoid a Klingon civil war, and Worf goes along with it for the good of the Empire. He's willing to be discombobulated, to basically, he's an honorable man, and he did nothing wrong, and his father did nothing wrong, but he's willing to pretend like he did for the betterment of the Empire. It's a very powerful stuff, and the way of seeing like Picard is the Chadish and like looking into it, like, and you have some great Picard moments in this episode. You can test that assumption at your whatever he said, at your leisure, but whatever. It was great moments. So Yeah, it was a bit disjointed how they had Kern come on as the Klingon exchange officer, and then all of a sudden they switch gears, kind of like a Simpsons episode, in the middle of it to be about Worf trying to defend his father's right. But it was still interesting. Like that part, I still like that part with Kern, like dressing everyone down and revealing that he's Worf's brother. That was all good stuff too. So, let us now move over to my number 35, which is a matter of perspective. And it's a matter of perspective that I like this episode because I've seen some other people who really didn't like this episode, but this is actually one of my favorite sort of trial episodes because the trial episode can be a bit of a cliche. But I think this attacks it in a very unique way, where you see holodeck recreations of the same events but from different perspectives. Now, I heard the argument that some of these perspectives are vastly too different to be realistic, that people couldn't have that vast of a difference, but my own personal experience thought, actually, I don't think it is that far-fetched, to be honest. I've seen some people have so many different perspectives on the same event. Now, maybe they take it a little too far, but I think the main thrust of the episode works, and I love how it turns out that the truth kind of lays somewhere in between of all these different perspectives, which I fucking loved, because Picard, of course, does his badass thing where he deduces and figures out it was actually, Salamanca, the bell hitting the bell, that actually was the one who killed himself by trying to kill Riker. He ended up killing himself, and the way he totally proves this in a really badass fashion, where it's like, whoa, we have the Krieger waves and we're running this experiment, and it was absolutely great. So I actually really enjoy this episode. Don't care what anyone says. Anyway, let me now get into my number 34, which is Contagion. Another second season episode, rearing its ugly head. I want to say this is another episode people aren't going to be that high on, that I really liked, that I was always a big fan on this. It was again, it was getting sort of into the archaeology thing where they find the Iconian Gateway, which I think is just a fascinating concept, a doorway that can travel anywhere. But it starts off with the Enterprise getting this computer virus that destroyed its sister ship, the Yamato, which I thought was a great way to it was a very powerful way to start the episode and really set the stakes. And it was really really tense situation where the Enterprise just is falling apart around them, and they're with this Romulan ship and they're hanging over this planet with weapons drawn. They're both falling apart while Picard has to figure out what to do with his Iconian Gateway. I really liked this episode. I thought it was a great Picard episode, and I thought it was just really fascinating. So, that's just me. Anyway, let's now get into my number 33, Thine Own Self. This is an episode some people, like my sister in particular, really don't like. I see. I was gonna say I always liked this episode, but that's not true. Like when this episode first came out, I thought it was okay. I actually learned to appreciate this episode a lot more when I got older and sort of more mature, and saw what a great. I think this is definitely by far the best character interaction between Data and the child, because they tried the storyline several times with hero worship. They tried an insurrection, and there's other cases where it just didn't work for me. I thought it was kind of forced and boring, to be honest, and kind of cliche. Whereas here, I totally bought Data's bond between the little girl, and the fact that he had amnesia, it may be a bit of a cliche, but I think it worked for the story. I think it added a really great layer that Data was trying to find himself, and at the same time he was forming a bond with this young girl and her father. and how they were working together on this disease, and it was just really fascinating stuff. How he didn't understand what the word radioactive meant, and he was spreading all these radioactive fragments to everyone. Of course, it was making them sick, and as him putting two together, it ends in this very powerful moment where like Data saves the whole community, but he's killed, and the little girl is like devastated by this. This is something she has to live with. Now, of course, Crusher and Riker come in and they beam Data's remains up to the ship, and he's fine again because he's an android. They just turn him back on. But as far as that little girl's concerned, like, her best friend just died, which is kind of a neat way to keep the Prime Directive intact. But oh, Pen Pals is another one when they try this child relationship with Data, which just really didn't work. This is a much better example. I just thought it was really powerful, particularly that scene where she says, do you think there's a place where, you know, everything is great and everyone gets along, and Data's looking up into the stars and he says, I do. Like, oh God, what a great, powerful moment. Really like this episode. Okay, so now let us get into my number 9 rated episodes. This again bodes really well for the show that we're only at number 33 on my list and already getting into my 9 rated range, showing how many great episodes I think there are in this show. So let's start with my number 33, which is The Quality of Life. Now, in a previous top 10 video that I mentioned I did before, I actually put this in my top 10. I don't think this is top 10 material. I think I was getting a bit overzealous by putting this in the top 10. Mainly I did it because I feel like this episode's really underrated. I think this is a really great episode, and I think it doesn't really get that much attention, so I wanted to draw more attention to say, hey, this is a great episode. Although top 10 is maybe overdoing it a little bit. 33 is probably a better, more fitting spot for it. But basically, I did really like this episode. I do think it is overlooked a lot. I think it was a great character episode for Data. He encounters these weird exocomp things, which are so cute, I gotta say. The little robot thingies that go beep, beep. And he finds that they're basically alive. And he puts it to the test, and they appear to fail the test, but they actually outsmarted the test to show that they are indeed alive. So when Riker wants to sacrifice them to save Picard and Geordi's life, Data makes a stance and locks the Enterprise out and refuses to let them do it, which is great. And it was such a powerful moment. And I love the interaction between Data and Riker, where Data's like, look, let me offer an alternative. I'll sacrifice myself. I'll beam over there to save Geordi and Picard. And Riker's like, but I can't let you do that. And Data's like, but I have a choice. I am choosing to do it. You are taking away the exocomp's choice. And the Riker's like, okay, well, what if we give the choice back to the exocomps? And Data agrees. And I thought that was powerful. Like, I love how they came to a compromise. I love how Riker didn't immediately be like, oh, put him under house arrest and blah, 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 fuck you, Data. Like, it showed the kind of working relationship they have. And I love that Data was able to stand up for his principles like that. I thought that was a very powerful character moment for Data. And Picard even understood. At the end, he's like, this is the most human thing you've done. They always say that shit. But anyway, but of course, when they offer the option to the exocomps to sacrifice themselves, they come up with a plan that's better. That doesn't require them all to sacrifice themselves, although one of them sacrifices themselves. But two of them survive, and they save Geordi and Picard, and everything's like, that was great. And plus it has this guest character who's like a really headstrong engineer, who I think is a really great character, strong tangible character. I wish we got more of her, but anyway, really underrated episode. So now let me move over to my number 30. Oh, sorry, I said that was 33. That's actually number 32. Gotta correct myself there. That was my number 32, so let's get over to my number 31, which is Symbiosis. First season episode. I think this is the one and only first season episode that will appear in my top 50, because the first season is not very good. But I really like Symbiosis, and again, this is something a lot of people disagree with me on. I think this is one of the better Prime Directive episodes. I thought it was a really powerful episode. Like the interactions, you find out that one alien species is like making the other aliens drug addicts, and they're not aware of it. They think they just have a virus, there's something really sinister about that, and there's a lot of undertones and social commentary about insurance companies and other entities using profit as a motive to keep people ill or sick, and you can make a lot of sort of analogies there, and I think it works really well. And I like the interactions between Picard and Crusher, and how Crusher is like totally just wants to violate the Prime Directive and just help the people, but Picard is very adamant that they find a diplomatic solution that keeps the Prime Directive intact. And I've heard people attack Picard about this. There's some people who just hate the Prime Directive, but I see his reasoning here, that you just go and willy-nilly throw your weight around. Even if your intention is to do good, you might not necessarily do good, and it does seem like forcing this entire alien world to go through withdrawal is not a great solution, but it's the most diplomatic one, and Picard really gives us a lot of thought, and I think I really like this episode. So anyway, let me get into my number 30, which is The Wounded. The minstrel boy to the war is gone. I gotta say, like, that moment at the end of the episode where O'Brien and his former captain Maxwell are sitting there singing that song, very emotional moment. Now, this is the first appearance of the Cardassians, and I instantly fell in love with the Cardassians. I saw this episode before the Cardassians were a thing, like before they were the main villain on Deep Space Nine, before they made more appearances on Next Gen, and I fell in love with them as an alien species immediately. I immediately wanted to see more of them, not because they were nice guys, they're not, they're assholes, but because they're interesting, because it's an interesting adversary. And so when I heard that they were becoming the main villains of Deep Space Nine, I was over the moon. I was like, yes, what a great choice. And because I think this episode, it sells them, like the whole, it's got Mark Alamo playing the first Cardassian, of course, and just his interactions with Picard was great. How he was pretending to be all diplomatic, but really he had, something underneath going. Like, that was great. But the personal story of O'Brien, and this is like the first character story we've ever gotten for him in the Star Trek franchise, about how he resented the Cardassians for forcing him to kill, which is something he never wanted to do, and how he carried that, and how he was able to talk down his former captain, who was still holding on for this need for revenge. I thought was very powerful. Like I said, that ending where they were singing that song, like, that was like a perfect way to end the episode. Like, it really gets me right here every time. Alright, so now let me move over to my number 29, which is Deja Q. This is one of the better Q episodes. I've heard some people not like this episode very much, which I don't understand. I think this is the first great Q episode. It's the one where they really got the formula of Q right, where they treated him more like a comedic character rather than a villain. And I think he really works in this role because he's kind of a villain, but they give him more dynamic than simply a bad guy. where they kind of show things from his perspective about how he has to go through the experience of being a human and how humiliating that is for him and how he has to get used to everything. And he actually has some character growth, like where Data sacrifices himself, or like almost sacrifices himself to save Q, and Q is actually really grateful for that in that moment where he gives him that laugh at the end of the episode. Was amazing. And of course, like the whole mariachi band, like that was hilarious. One of the funniest Q moments. And he's like, but I feel like celebrating. I don't. And that was funny shit. And it was just a great like character story too. How Q was like, when he went to Picard and was like, I can't believe that Data almost sacrificed himself to save me. It's like, I'm not deserving of it. Like, those were great moments. So I thought this was a really great episode. So anyway, let's get into my number 28, Dharmak and Jalad at Tanagra. Now, again, this is another episode where some people will put it in their top 10 or top 5s. Where, although I do really, really like this episode, I wouldn't quite put it that high. Because there's some flaws in this episode. I think it does drag a bit, if I'm being honest. But it is, though, a great, great character interaction between Picard and his alien species and them forming this bond. I think it's one of the better, like, sort of diplomatic episodes. As I said, like, the crowning achievement is the scene where Picard is telling Dathan the story of Gilgamesh, and Dathan dies as he's telling the story, and how he's saying, he who was my friend is now lost forever, and then Dathan dies. Like, that gets me right here. That does tear me up. That is a very powerful moment, and how Picard sort of overcomes and learns the language, and he beams back and talks to the first officer and just says right out front, like, "Do not enter Tanagra, the walls fell," and showing the bond that he formed. Like, that was some powerful shit. Now, this isn't in my top 10 or top 5 because, and I'm not going to get too much into the language, but the language is impractical. This is not a language, and as a matter of fact, it's a dialect. So there's no reason why these aliens shouldn't be able to understand Picard and Starfleet. They would just think they're talking weird and be like, it's like someone coming in with a weird dialect and talking about chili bins and whatever, and footpaths in America anyway. And they'd be like, and so it would just sound strange to them, but they have to have a base language because it's impractical. There's no practical way for these aliens' language to evolve without a base language, because they say Jalad at the ocean. Well, what the fuck is an ocean? They need a base language to establish those things. Therefore, they have a base language. Therefore, they would be able to understand what Picard is saying. He'd just be talking funny. So it kind of undoes like the entire episode, but you know, whatever. It's still, that is a base problem in my opinion. But I still, God, that scene with Picard and Dathan was just so damn powerful. So I still gotta show a lot of love. I still do really like this episode a lot. Yeah, maybe just not as much as some other people do. Anyway, so let's get into my number 27, which is the Defector. This is another really powerful episode, third season episode, that I think really works. It's got great acting about a Romulan defector, which is a very interesting concept, and they do such a great character story with this character. He's so dynamic and he's so interesting because they do explore how, because they keep saying that, oh, you're a traitor, why aren't you giving us more information? We don't believe you because you're already defecting, so just give us all the information. But in his mind, he's not. In his mind, he's a patriot. He's doing what he needs to do to save the Romulan Empire, but eventually it comes to the point where he realizes he has to fully give in and trust Starfleet if he wants this to work. I love that scene, by the way, with Picard. It's like, you are a traitor. Make your peace with it. That's like whatever. That's not a direct quote, but I thought it was such a powerful Picard moment in the way Picard plays him, and the way you see him come to terms with the fact that he's never going to see his family again, and of course, and then the ending is so heartbreaking when he finds out that it was actually all for naught, that the Romulans were just tricking him, that there was never going to be a war in the first place, so he really wasted his time. They were just testing his loyalty, which, god damn, that was such a powerful gut punch. And he responds in suicide, which kind of makes sense, but you have Picard saying, look, this, with the courage of Admiral Sherrock, there will be a day where we can take his letter home to his daughter. Like that, very powerful moment. And it was just very suspenseful and engaging throughout. It's just a really well-constructed episode. Alright, so now, let's move over to my number 26, Phantasms. Yes, this is 26. I love this episode. I don't care what anyone says. This is another underrated 7th season episode. A lot of underrated 7th season episodes. I think the tone of this episode is really effectively creepy, like more so than any other. So this is the episode where Data's dreaming, and he having these strange dreams, and he starts attacking Troy and sees the cellular peptide cake with the mint frosting, as Worf has to point out. And you find out that it's these alien creatures who are sucking the peptides or whatever out of the human being, and that they're dying. Like the whole Enterprise crew will basically dissolve into minerals. And I thought that was one of the most scary, creepy, creeped out moments I've ever had with the TV show or movie, where Crusher was like scanning herself and you saw these big things on Riker's face and they were just eating at them and sucking the life out of them. Like, I don't know about you, but that is some real effective horror shit to me. That really creeped me out. And I think the strange, like, metaphorical dreams that Data have, like, really adds to his atmosphere. And plus, the fact that you don't know what Data is doing, how when he, like, sees Troy in the turbolift and, like, hold very still. Like, they effectively play it off like it's a horror trope, but it actually turns out to be that he's helping Troy, and that he's trying to that he senses these creatures and is just not coming to terms with it, and then the sort of messing with his mind, which is something I fucking love, and I just think that it's played out so well. Just the tone of this episode, I think, is just perfect. But anyway, I don't care what anyone says. I love this episode. So let me move over to the next episode. My number 25. The Best of Both Worlds. Now, it goes without saying. It goes without saying that most people would put this in not just their top 10 or top 5. Most people put this at number 1 or number 2. Let's be honest there. Maybe number 3. Not number 25. And this is something I sort of dealt with on my channel a lot. Those who are not familiar with my channel may be shocked that this is all the way down at number 25, but those who are familiar with my channel may be a bit surprised that it is as high as number 25, because I had spoken out numerous times of how I like this episodes. I think they're great, really engaging, powerful stuff. Just not the best thing ever. This is just not top 10 material for me. I do believe, personally, it's a tad bit overrated. I did a full-length review where I talked about my reasons why, which I'm not really going to get into here. Now, it mainly has to do with the Shelby line not working for me in the first part, and that the second part kind of not being as satisfying as it could have been, like the ending solution, and the Borg ship should have just destroyed the Enterprise several times, and the ending solution with Data putting them to sleep was a bit too easy. But I will say on a rewatch of these episodes, I did appreciate it a lot more. In fact, I put them a lot higher than I would have done in the past, because I do see what people latch on to. The great character stories with Riker and even Picard, even though he doesn't factor that much in. But like the scene when Picard's being assimilated and you see a single tear, like, what a powerful scene. But moreover, you see Riker really come into his own and learning to deal with not having Picard around and having to set him aside in order to defeat this huge threat. Like, that was powerful. And like the music and the way it's shot is very, very effective. And the whole, not just the way it's shot, but the way it's written, where it really sinks in just how dire the situation is, and it does a really good job of it, like Picard touring the ship and talking to Guinan when they're trapped in the nebula and stuff like that. It really does a great job of setting the stakes, making you feel those stakes. And then in the second part, when they show the Borg ship, like, oh, it's entering section 001, you see it fly past this ring the planet, and it goes dun 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 dun. Like, that's that was really powerful stuff. But, you know, I have said in the past that I think Star Trek in general has done a better job with action stories, particularly Deep Space Nine, which I think is the better show as far as war action stories go. And so, although I think this is a great example, will remain definitely be a great example of an action war story, it's not Next Generation's strong suit. Next Generation's strong suit is more the drama stuff, which I'll get into, and the powerful emotional stuff. And so, yeah, and so I don't think it would be top 10, especially not number 1 for me, because I don't think this exemplifies what makes Next Generation great. It is good, but I just don't think it's the best. That's just me. It is the best of both worlds. But anyway, yeah, I do see why people love it. I love it too. Just not number 1 material for me. So anyway, let's get into my number 24. And I know from now on, everyone's going to be like, how could you put this episode better than Best of Both Worlds? But so be it. Let's get into my number 24, which is Homeward, which I think is another very underrated 7th season episode. I think it's extremely powerful. Again, one of the best Prime Directive episodes. I would say probably the best Prime Directive episode that Next Generation ever done. I think it's a really unique concept. I think this whole saying that season 7 they were running out of the ideas, like, this episode proves that wrong. This is not running ideas. This is a fresh and interesting and very powerful idea of having first of all, the Worf's foster brother was just someone I really wanted to see for 7 years, and I finally got to see him. I was like, yes. And I thought the interactions between him and Worf were great. And because I like actually, for me, and this is just me personally, I like exploring Worf's human foster family more than I do his Klingon family, because they get too much in his Klingon side and they kind of forget about the part that he was actually raised on Earth, or raised with humans. So I love seeing him interact with this human being who he thinks of as his brother, and how Worf, like, is so blinded by his, like, sibling rivalry with his brother. Like, he doesn't see what his brother is trying to accomplish. All he sees is that his brother is being dishonorable and pushing that dishonor on him, just like he always does. And I like that. It's a very it shows Worf as a very flawed, realistic character, because he's not able to see that what his brother's doing is saving lives. And of course, I have heard, I think Picard does take the Prime Directive to a bit of an extreme in this episode, where he's rather would just let everyone die than save everyone. But this kind of the situation that you had. But when Nikolai puts him in this situation, Picard's not just going to kill them. He's not just going to be like, well, you weren't supposed to save him, so let's kill them all. Of course, he's not that cold-blooded. He's going to commit to the plan. He's forced to commit to the plan. He's not happy about it, but he has to. And the holodeck experienced surge or whatever, so it's falling apart while they're trying to convince these primitive people that they're traveling to the other side of the planet. Really, they're going through the holodeck, which I think this is a very fascinating idea. And I thought the scene where one of the dudes got out, who was the most like skeptical dude, and he found himself on the Enterprise, and he was terrified, like, fuck. That was one of the most powerful moments in the entire show. And he ends up, of course, committing suicide. Like, that was some powerful shit. So it shows like Nikolai was ultimately successful, but it wasn't a perfect plan, because that guy that was a horrible way to die for him. So it shows the consequences of his actions. But eventually, Worf comes to realize, comes to accept Nikolai for who he is, and realize what he was trying to do, and accept his love for Cassidy Yates, same actress. He was one of the aliens that he saved. But so yeah, I think this is a really, really great episode. So anyway, let's now move over to my number 23, which is The Emissary. Not to be confused with the Deep Space Nine pilot. This is the episode where Kalar first appeared. Another second season episode, which I actually appreciated a lot more in my rewatch. I think this is probably the best romance of the week episode. And of course, it's helped by the fact that it's ultimately not a romance of the week, because Kalar does appear again, even though she only appears in 2 episodes. She proves a very important character. And I just really bought her relationship with Worf. I thought she was one of the most interesting, well thought out, well drawn out guest characters they ever had. And the strength of this episode by far is her relationship with Worf. Now, the storyline with the Klingons waking up or whatever, that's kind of, it's not bad. It's just kind of, it's not what's important about this episode. And it was, parts of it were kind of contrived, where they forced Worf and Kalar to work together, which, if Picard was really worried about solving the mission, then he wouldn't force them to work together, because obviously they weren't working well together. But you wouldn't have these great character actions if he did that. And she was just such a great character. And this is like one of the most effective love stories the show has done. So anyway, let me move over to my number 22, which is Ship in a Bottle. First of all, I was ecstatic when I learned that they were bringing Moriarty back. Now, I wasn't a huge fan of Elementary Dear Data, which you won't find on this top 50 list. But it left with a sort of cliffhanger, which what happened to this Moriarty hologram, and I honestly thought they would never follow up on this again. Because that's par for the course for the, episodic Next Generation. Let's leave. Ooh, there's this thing. Oh, what will happen? Who knows? Who cares if we don't follow up? They fucking do, and he's pissed. And he's like, he can experience the passage of time. It's like, after 4 years, you did nothing. You just left me in the computer system to rot. And then it leads to one of the most mind-bendy, like pre-inception type, world within a world within a world kind of game, where he is on the holodeck, but makes Picard thinks that they're out in the real world, but they're actually still on the holodeck. And so Picard solves the situation by making another holodeck program and making Moriarty think he's in the real world, but he's actually in the holodeck. It's very clever. And the whole way this unravels slowly was brilliant. And of course, Moriarty is a very fascinating character. I think much more so than he was in his first appearance, where he actually puts the Enterprise in danger. Yeah, what more can I say? I think this is a very clever, very well executed episode. Absolutely loved it. So, Now let me move over to my number 21, which is the Pegasus. This is another really great 7th season episode. I do like my season 7. I thought this was a great character story for Riker, as he has to confront the man he's become as opposed to the man he used to be, where he was a young ensign and he was just young and stupid and listened to his captain. Now his captain's an admiral and trying to force him to do things that he doesn't want to do, and he's having to come with terms to that. And god damn it, I love the way Picard really puts him in this place where Riker's like, sir, maybe you should take this up with Admiral Pressman. He's like, I'm taking this up with you, Will! Like, that was some damn powerful stuff. And just the character dilemma that he was in. And no, he did not go into holodeck and consult with Archer. Like, that's silly, but no, we're not talking about that. But the character dilemma that he was in was just great stuff. And plus they had like that whole interaction again. They're filling in a plot hole with the whole why don't Starfleet have cloaking device? It makes no sense. Well, here we go. There's a treaty. That's why. It's not that they're not smart enough to develop one. It's because they have a treaty with the Romulans, which John Locke, Admiral Pressman, is violating. So yeah, that was great stuff. And plus that Romulan character, I fucking love this Romulan commander who is like, oh, can I help you, Picard? I am touched by your concern, but I was never in any real danger. Like, I love this guy. I wish we would have gotten more of him. It's so great in this situation. This episode was so tense, and it built up the tension, earned it really well. I think this is a really, really great episode. So now, let me get into my number 20, and this was, I think, an honorable mention for my top 10 before, and I am sad that it is down to number 20. I do think maybe it should have been higher, because I do hold a special place in my heart for this episode, and that is Clues. Which I think is kind of an underrated or overlooked 4th season episode. The plan has failed. Which is, again, a very effectively creepy episode. The way it unravels is very clever. Very masterful done. It starts off, of course, with that scene with, Gloria from Cleveland, like the whole holodeck scene with Guinan, which is interesting, but it leads into, like, one clue after another, like, building this mystery, and that Picard just cannot let go of, and he can tell that Data's hiding something, and he senses that Data's doing it for the good, but he can't let it go, and he knows that Data's career would be ruined unless they figure out what's going on, and then they uncover it and find out, uncovering is not a good idea because the aliens want to kill the ship, and there's actually a good reason why Data was lying to everyone. Like, it was such a powerful reveal, and it was just constructed in such an interesting way. And that whole thing when Troy first appears and goes, the plan has failed, like, that was fucking creepy. That was like out of nowhere. Troy just, because before they really explained anything, like, what the hell? It was such a great way to portray what was going on. So yeah, God, I love this episode. So anyway, let's now get into my number 19, which is Iborg. This is another really great episode. I think this episode is often recognized as great, and for good reason. It's the first sort of Borg-centric episode that took a more dramatic viewpoint, where it's all about a lost child. Now, there are some logistical fallacies in this episode, but if you overlook those, it's a very strong character story. It's like the character story that Picard, the transformation that Picard goes through, that Guinan goes through, that Geordi goes through, is very powerful in this episode. Like, Geordi's the one, of course, who immediately latches on to Hugh and becomes best friends with him. But Picard takes him a lot longer because he has a lot more, of course, waiting. Again, they're playing off of how his time being assimilated really affected him. And I think this is probably one of the better uses of that. And he's able to overcome that. and able to see the greater good and able to look on this person as a person and not just an enemy, not just the villain. That basically was just a lost boy who was kind of helpless. And this kind of feeds into the show Picard, where they explore this a lot more with the XBs. So yeah, I thought this was a very, very powerful episode. Alright, so now let me get into my number 18, The Measure of a Man, which is the last second season episode I'll talk about because it's my highest rated second season episode. I think it's the best episode of the first 2 seasons. It has some contrivances in it, such as Riker being forced to be the attorney, the attorney that's against the defense. I'm losing my words now. But the prosecutor, yeah, he's forced to be the prosecutor, and that's kind of contrived. And some of the stakes are a bit contrived. Like, I don't really believe Starfleet would behave in this way, because this matter should have been settled when Data first entered the Starfleet Academy. Like I said in my review, this probably would have worked better if this was a flashback episode to when Data first entered the Academy. Then it would actually make a lot more sense. The matter should have been settled now that Data obviously is a person because he's wearing a Starfleet uniform. He's definitely not a piece of property. So I think that whole thing is contrived. But come on now. This is a really great episode. Has some great Picard speeches, great interactions. It was a great journey from Picard realizing that what they're talking about is turning in an alien race, basically, into slaves. And how what he was doing there was like the most important thing ever. And where he hammers down his big Picard speech, where it is like, so what is sentience? Like, that was great stuff. And it really defines Data's character too, and how magnanimous he was towards Riker, and saying like, I don't blame you because your actions actually helped me even though they hurt you. Like, it's just really, you have to acknowledge just really how masterfully written the dialogue was in this episode, and just how engaging and powerful, and how many powerful messages they are about sticking up for people's rights. Definitely resonates a lot. Alright, so it's now time to get into my best of the best, my top 10, not my top 10, but my 10 rated episodes, the absolute best, what I believe are the best of this show. So let's start with my number 17 for my 10 rated episodes, and my number 17 is Parallels. This is the episode where Worf jumps from parallel universe to parallel universe. Now, I haven't actually heard much praise for this episode. I always loved it. My friends, people I knew, always loved this episode when it first came out. But I was told after I did a video where I named some of my favorite like alternate reality or parallel universe episodes, I put this in, like, I think it was my number 3, and someone responded saying, oh, well, people don't like this episode, it's not very well liked. But I looked it up on IMDb, it's actually in the top 10 on IMDb, so I don't know where that person was getting their information from this not being well liked, because it seemed like if it's that high rated on IMDb, it must be well liked. But regardless, it still feels like an underrated episode to me, because it feels like no one really talks about it, or I don't see it in a lot of top 10s. But I think it's a very unique episode that focuses on Worf, and I love that it's an episode that focuses on Worf that deals with like weird science stuff and parallel universes instead of Klingon stuff, because it seems like when we have a Worf episode, we just get more Klingon stuff and honor and blah, 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 blah. But here we have him jumping from parallel universe to parallel universe. Some of the changes are like different, like there's painting on the one side of the room, now it's on a different side of the room. And I think the way this episode plays out is it's very interesting how they have all those slight differences that are very like disorientating, and Worf at first thinks no one believes him because he remembers winning the tournament, and all of a sudden everyone's acting like he lost the tournament, and then he remembers something the Cardassians did, and everyone's like, what are you talking about? Like, I love the way they plan that and how it builds and it builds and it builds until you get the big revelation that he's in a totally different parallel universe where he's married to Troy, he's the first officer, Riker's the captain, Picard got killed with the Borg, and then it goes from there where you have the whole like space-time thing fractures, and you got thousands of Enterprises just pouring in like that. I think that's amazing. I think that is amazing that the show actually went there. That seems like something the show would never actually dare to do. And so I thought this was a very effective character story for Worf, and a very interesting, and they put it in this larger context of these parallel universes. It's a very unique story in the Star Trek franchise, so I think it is one of the best. Alright, so now we move over to my number 16, which is Face of the Enemy. Now, I always loved this episode, but on this rewatch, I loved it even more. Like, it made me appreciate this episode so much more on my rewatch, that this is like the height of doing suspense espionage story, like at its best. This is one of the best examples. Like, everything about this episode was well constructed, well executed. The music was great. This is why I commonly hear this thing where, oh, the music in later TNG sucked, which I think is bullshit. I think this episode is a great example. This music is amazing. I think the music in the later TNG is better than the music in earlier TNG, and I'll fight anyone on that. But, I mean, best of both worlds maybe being the exception. But anyway, regardless of that, I think this was amazing. I think, and also another thing, everyone always talks about how Marina Sirtis is such a terrible actor. When I did my video, when I named my least favorite actors, everyone and their mother said I should have had Marina Sirtis in there. I was like, what, you didn't have Marina, so she's a terrible actor. I'm like, actually, you're wrong. Watch this episode. She's amazing. This is some of the best piece of acting done by anyone in any Star Trek ever, and I will fight you on that as well. So to say that she's a terrible actor, and they say, oh, they're giving me shit about putting Gates McFadden on the list, but watch my worst list. She is a terrible actor. Whenever she's given a main role, Dr. Crusher, she like sucks. Anyone with any knowledge of any acting ability can clearly see that she's a horrible actor, whereas Marina Sirtis, she's given a main role, and she fucking does a Patrick Stewart level job. So get the fuck out of here with this Marina Sirtis being a bad actor. Watch this episode. She's an amazing actor. She's like, the way she hits it, because she plays that like nuance of knowing that like they don't have to state outright that she's using her empathic powers to help her in this espionage mission. Like, they play it in nuance. They play it so that she's reading people, and that's what's helping her maintain this cover, maintain this fiction, and that she's getting terrified. She's thrown in this terrified situation, but then when she stands up to herself and she's like, listen, Nivek, we're going to contact the Enterprise. You're going to do what I'm going to say, or I'm going to turn you in and have you executed. And the look on his face was like, oh, like that was an amazing tense moment. Like, this is just amazing writing. This is like espionage done to the best. This is one of the best Romulan episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise. It's just, everything about it is executed so well. So amazing episode. Anyway, I'm sorry. Let me get, I mean, the reason why Marina Sirtis is typically not that great of an actor is because she's giving shitty lines. She's giving shitty scripts because the writers really don't know how to handle Troy. They bullshit like The Lost. They give her a great script and she fucking nails it. Dr. Crusher, they try to give her a good script and she still does the shitty job. So get out of here with this. I'm sorry. Anyway, let's get into my number 15. Sticking with the theme of the best, The Mind's Eye. Now, this is another episode, another Romulan episode. I guess I said the other one was the best one. Well, this one's a bit better. But still great Romulan episodes. This is another episode that I always loved. But it wasn't until this recent rewatch that I learned to appreciate a lot more and think of it. It's not just another good Next Generation episode, but a masterpiece. Like one of the absolute best. I think, again, like the whole tone, I think is very unique. This is a very dark episode. Anyone who says Next Generation isn't dark, what about the bright, cheery atmosphere of Next Generation? This is 4th season. This is still like one of the darkest episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise. I would say, where Geordi is like captured, tortured, to show him like being forced all these images like of death and destruction straight into his head, and he's screaming, ah! And they play that dark, and again, the music in this episode is amazing, absolutely wonderful. And then they had that Klingon, the storyline with the Klingon civil war that they're accusing the Federation of involving themselves in. And again, that was a truly intense, dark storyline, particularly that moment where the governor like thought he had hard evidence that Starfleet was involved, so they surrounded the Enterprise with all these Klingon ships, and he's like, do not insult my intelligence by denying it. And in that music, the punctuation with the music is so good in later TNG. I can't believe people say that. But anyway, that music that has that punctuation when the Enterprise is just surrounded by all those Klingon ships, and Picard is like, fuck, like I felt that, like you feel that suspense, like on the edge of your seat, because they earn it. And then how fucking intense, absolutely intense, over the top that ending is with Geordi. And again, this is amazing cinematography. They had the cool like fishbowl shots with LaForge walking down the corridor to assassinate the Klingon ambassador, while you have intercut that with Data figuring it all out. Like, that was really perfect. That was amazing. That's exactly what you want from a high stakes, high tension, edge of your seat thriller, and they execute it so well where Data just gets it at the nick of time. He figures it out, he puts it all together, and this is amazing Data, man. This is a great use of Data. And he contacts Worf, and he's like, arrest Mr. LaForge. It's like, what? That is an order. Like, so good, so good. Now, the one criticism I had of this episode that I've mentioned before in other videos is that it ends on a very dark, dreary note where LaForge is haunted by these memories that were taken away from him. It's gonna say it's gonna be a really long process of recovery and blah blah blah, and it's never mentioned ever again. And that's I don't put that as a blight on this episode. I put that as a blight on the whole episodic format of Next Generation, that they should have paid this off better instead of just pretending it just went away after this episode. But whatever. It was still, but I remember everything. Man, it's still such an absolute amazing episode. Alright, so now let me get into my number 14, which is Lower Decks. The episode of Star Trek Next Generation. Of course, not the TV show, although the TV show takes its inspiration from this episode, which, you know, to be honest, when I first saw this episode, I was really thrown off by this format. I wasn't used to Next Generation doing weird things with this format. What the hell? Following these like junior officers I don't give a fuck about. What's the point? But and they managed to take my speculation, because I came at this episode from a very resistant standpoint, and they managed to take that and really get me involved, to really get me care about these characters, really get me to like these characters, appreciate them, want to know what happened to them, and affect me so much where it had a very effective emotional ending where it actually got me to cry for these characters when one of them died, and made you feel the kinship to all the characters, and it made you feel like warm and fuzzy when Worf actually sat down with the friends of those who died, like Ensign Cito. Like, it was a great character story. I mean, they started off as just like, oh, here's on the belly of the Enterprise, but through that you had that really well developed, well-rounded character story of Ensign Cito, who was just a background character who we saw in the Fifth Duty, and I fucking love that continuity that they kept. They brought her back, just this background character just happened to be in the background of Fifth Duty. They brought her back, had Picard said, I know that no other captain would give you a chance, and that's why I brought you here, to prove yourself, because I know that you're not, that incident doesn't define you. And she did, and how Worf had to sort of coach her, do the deja challenge or whatever, when he kicked her ass just to get her to speak up for herself. And eventually she did, and she proved herself, and she did the dangerous mission, but the mission was so dangerous that she died. And you could see, not only could you see how much it affected her friends, you could see how much it affected Picard, like his voice when he was saying and then making the shipwide announcement that she had died. You could see how much it affected him, and how saddened he was by it, and how saddened her friends were by it. Like, it was just... And just having a day in the life of the Lower Decks really helped establish these characters, to help get you involved. And you had Alyssa Ogala, again, another character who was just in the background, and you got to care about her more and care about her friends, and they sort of juxtaposed the two poker games between the junior officers and the senior officers, which I think was a really nice touch. So, yeah, I thought this was an amazing episode. I think it is definitely one of the best of Next Generation. Alright, so now we'll get into my number 13, which is the Silicon Avatar. And this is an episode many people may be surprised that I have it this high. I think this is an underrated episode. Most people don't think this episode is all that great. They think it's okay. They think it's kind of boring. But this is an episode, again, that I always liked. But on this recent rewatch, I really, really learned to appreciate it. I do think this is one of the best dramas that the show has ever done. I think is one of the most emotional. I think the construction of this episode is actually amazing. So it starts out with, Riker hitting on some chick, as he always does. That's Riker. But then it gets the colony he's at gets attacked by this crystalline entity, and the woman he's hitting on with dies, and as well as an elderly man. And so it starts in this high tension place where, because Riker and Worf and Crusher had to hide in this caves, and they thought they were gonna die, but eventually they're saved by the Enterprise, but they come out from underground and find out like the entire world is decimated. And so they go on a hunt after the crystalline entity. And so it gets into this other storyline where the scientist has been hunting down a crystalline entity she had a son who died at Almacourt Theta, who's killed the place where Data was found. And he was killed by the crystalline entity. So she's, at first redirects her anger towards Data. And Data just says matter-of-factly in his Data way, just like, well, I couldn't have anything to do with it, and just rebuts her. And eventually, when she learns that he's capable, that he has the memories of her dead son, and he's capable of reproducing his voice and letters that he wrote, like that, she kind of latches on to Data as kind of an avatar or surrogate for her son. And she uses that as an excuse to basically go on this hunt for the crystalline entity. When Picard is like, look, we gotta, we're not here to kill it. We're not hunters. We're going to try to talk to it. And she like gets really pissed off with him and is like, blah, 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 blah. And I like how there's this argument between Picard and Riker, where Riker kind of sides with her, and Picard's like, look, you're just letting your emotions get the better of you because your friend died. And he's like, look, this isn't the first time I lost someone on the mission I just want to do what's best for the mission. Here's the thing, because I heard other opinions that side with Riker. I actually very much side with Picard. I think Picard is definitely going at it the best way, that they're Starfleet. They're not hunters. Like, if it's putting the ship in danger, sure, but as they said, they are in no danger with their shields up. Like, the crystalline entity poses no danger for them. And if it comes to it, they're not going to let them kill a bunch of people. They're not going to let the crystalline entity attack another planet. But they have plenty of time to try to open communications and find some other solution. And maybe another food source for it, so it doesn't have to kill any more people. Like, yes, absolutely do that. It's worth the time. That's what Starfleet's all about. So I do think Picard is actually absolutely correct that Riker was letting his emotions get the better of him. And that Picard's way was the right way. And it's so interesting, though, because this is a follow-up to Crystalline Entity, which just appeared in one episode previous, Data Lore, and that was a silly, over-the-top, ridiculous, silly first season episode, where the Crystalline Entity is just this evil monster, and it's just so amazing that they took that and they turned it into something, like, more tangible, more real, and made this, like, really high-stakes drama out of it, that it was an actual entity that they were trying to communicate with, and it shows, like, the descent that Dr. Marr takes from being this, letting her grief really overwhelm her, and that's obvious from the get-go that she should not have been put into any position of power, because she is clearly driven by her grief. And so she breaks the rules. She defies Picard and kills the crystalline entity without his permission. And it's a very sombering moment. I think it was a very powerful moment. But what's more powerful, I think, first of all, that scene where Data is reading her dead son's letter to her in his own words and his voice. That was a very powerful scene, first of all. That was an amazingly powerful scene where she was, like, really breaking down from that and just how much it affected her. And it sort of drove her over the edge. And so it led perfectly into the ending scene where she goes to Data, like, thinking that Data, again, is some sort of avatar surrogate for her son, and says, "I did it for you, Remy, don't you see? I did it for you." And Data, just very matter-of-factly, in his Data way, just blankly looks at her and says, "I don't agree. Everything, all the letters I have about your son, everything I know about him, says that he would be sad at this moment because he loved your career and you just threw that away. So he would be sad." And that was a very cold, matter-of-fact way to just, you could see the hurt on her face, just to slam, how that just slammed down. Which frankly she deserved, because she just killed a sentient being. Without permission, she defied orders. She went behind people's backs. She, made the systems off limits so Geordi and Worf couldn't stop her, and to kill an entity. Now, it's not up to her. Like, it's not up to Starfleet. In fact, they're not judges, executioners. It's not up to them to pass judgment. Even if you say, "Oh, it mass murdered people," but Picard, in his own argument, says it's not murdering; it is feeding. It's this process, and so if they could communicate with it as a sentient being, they could come up with a better solution. But she bypassed that, and so it's just such a cold, hard truth that she was thrown back in her face by Data in his matter-of-fact way. That, no, you done fucked up. Your son would hate what you just did. That was probably the worst thing anyone could ever say to her in that moment. Not you're arrested, you're going to be thrown in jail for the rest of her life, or call her names. None of that would be nearly as bad as what Data said to her. But it's the cold hard truth. And shows just how far gone she gone, and how she let vengeance sort of lead her astray. And so in that terms, I think it was one of the most powerful stories this show has ever told. It was one of the most dramatic, one of the most emotional, and definitely well acted and well pulled off. Like the actress who pulled Mar, and as long as with Brent Spiner, like they did amazing jobs in this episode. So I think it's criminally underrated why more people don't have this much higher and just say, "Oh, it's okay." Fuck that okay. This is a masterpiece. Anyway, I'm sorry. Let me get into my number 12, the Drumhead. Now, talk about Picard speeches. Has some of the best Picard speeches, and this is noted to credit to this episode. This is, a lot of people do recognize this is one of the best Star Trek episodes and one of the best Picard episodes. Because again, it's constructed really well, where Picard has to work with his admiral, and again, you had the cliche of the asshole admiral, but I think even though she does turn out to be an asshole admiral, there's no doubt about that, she's more nuanced than that. She's more nuanced than just a mustache twirly evil admiral. Like, you see her perspective, and of course Picard at first is like happy to work with her and likes her, until she starts to realize that she's letting her desire to crack open big, to unravel this conspiracy where none exists, get the better of her, and she's actually causing a lot more harm than good. And of course, this episode becomes huge social commentary. It becomes even more relevant in the decades after this episode was released, about how one lets their prejudice and fears get the better of them. And of course, I think this episode itself was drawing on McCarthyism. That was very obvious, although the analogy it makes is to the whole drumhead child, because they don't want to be too blatant with their metaphors. But of course, McCarthyism kind of made a comeback in the 2000s after 9/11. So it became extremely relevant in that era as well. Well, with the whole demonizing, criminalizing people just for their ethnicity, just for their historical background, just for and letting fear get the better of someone and let it control them and do things that actually take away people's rights, take away liberties. And I love how Picard was the voice who's standing up and saying no when anyone's rights are or down or taken away or tread upon, we're all damaged. And I love how he was quoting her father when he was saying that. So he was throwing her father's words, what's a Picard thing to do, back in her face, and then just threw her over the top and made her explode. And the admirals there could see what a fraud she was, and they stripped her of her power and took this away. Like that, it was just an example. Not only a lot of great Picard speeches, but just an example of Picard at his best, of him recognizing what's wrong and then taking steps to do something about it in the most awesome Picard way I can. He's a true hero. Say that. And this was just really, I love how most of the episode is crafted through dialogue. It's really well done. So yes, definitely one of the best episodes of Next Generation. Okay. So now let me get into my number 11 best episode of Star Trek Next Generation, and that is Timescape. Now, this episode apparently was originally created to be like cause and effect on steroids. And in that regard, I think it succeeds. In fact, in my opinion, although this is a minority opinion, I think that this is clearly the better episode, that they clearly did outdo themselves from cause and effect. Like, okay, so first, and I think this episode is really underrated as well. It's another underrated episode that maybe doesn't get quite as much love as it should. It's not very, I wouldn't say it's very emotional or dramatic, but it's very suspenseful and very intriguing. And I think it is a great character story because it starts out with Picard, LaForge, Troy, and Data bonding on the shuttle, and they had that story. And it's a funny scene where Picard's like, he keeps talking and in one unbroken sentence, and just has them bonding over eating dinner, which is a great character moment, but it's then interrupted by all the weird time shit where time moves at different rates, which is like a really fascinating concept. But they take this concept up to the next level, as where like the closer they get to the Enterprise, all this weird shit was time's getting on, we have to get to the Enterprise. But the closer they get to the Enterprise, the worse it gets, until they find that the Enterprise is locked in the battle with the Romulan warboard frozen in time, and that is the center of the time disturbances. And that was fascinating as fuck, and it was eerie. This is one of the most effectively eerie episodes, where the Picard and Troy and LaForge and Data are basically isolated. Like there's alone on this in this weird time hellhole, and they find out it gets even worse when they investigate that the Enterprise is in the process of having a warp core explosion. It's in the process of exploding. Like, and I love how Data states this matter of factly. It's like, and Picard's like, is there anything we can do to stop it? And Data's like, we can't stop it. It's already happened. The fact it's happening really slowly doesn't change the fact that the Enterprise is already destroyed. Which again is really daunting. You have the, Dr. Crusher being shot by a phaser at point blank range, and how it really just ups the stakes. But then I love how it gets even more weird. Like the whole thing with Picard drawing a smiley face on the cloud was hilarious. I fucking love that. But also, things get worse. Absolutely one of my favorite scenes of the episode or any show is when they are scanning. They find the aperture in the Romulan engine room, and they scan it, and it causes times to move backwards, forward again. Like, this is one of the most intense scenes. And you have that amazing moment where Picard's just sitting on the runabout minding his own business, and he sees the Enterprise explore, and they have that amazing music that really plays this up well, where you just go, da, da, and then the Enterprise, time starts to move backwards, and the Enterprise starts to get re-put back together, and the music again is perfect for this moment where it's like perfectly crafted, where it goes dun, 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 dun. It gives you that feeling that you're running backwards, and you cut from that to the Romulan ship where everyone is like Geordi and Data are standing there, how everyone around them are like starting to go meep, 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 and start going backwards, and then time stops again, and that amazing punctuation again with the music that really shows you just how precarious this situation there is. This episode really lets you feel the stakes and lets you feel them really high. It was just amazing. That was one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. But then the rest of the episode goes is really interesting from there, where they meet this Romulan alien who explains everything to them. They realize what they have to do, so they put everyone in their positions and fix everything. Yeah, I thought this is an absolute amazing episode. I think is criminally underrated. Absolutely great. So anyway, we'll now get into my top 10 favorite episodes of Star Trek Next Generation. Here we are, the top 10, or at least my newer top 10. So let's start with my number 10, The Survivors. Talking about an underrated episode. I had put this in my top 10 the 2 previous times I've done a top 10, and I got in comments saying that this episode didn't deserve to be in there or whatever, and I will stand by that it absolutely does. That this has always been one of my favorite Next Generation episodes. I think it deserves to be this. I always call it the Picard is the Man episode. This is basically where there's a mystery, and I think it's a very fascinating mystery too. It's just not your, who done it or whatever. Did Riker kill this guy? Well, of course he fucking didn't. Instead, it's a mystery of a Federation colony that was completely destroyed except for 2 old people. Like, that is a fucking mystery. And the way that slowly starts to unravel and you get pieces and pieces filled in, I think was masterfully done. Masterfully done. And I love how Picard, he hasn't have it all figured out early on, but you could tell that he's kind of on to it, and he knows that he's playing a game of cat and mouse with Kevin Osberg. He's just not sure what the nature of the game or what the exact rules are, but he knows that something's going on, so he's playing him, playing along with it, whereas Riker and the other people seem to be they're a bit ignorant of what's actually going on, but Picard is on it. And I love how he slowly puts the pieces together. But then you have the element with Troy, where, and again, this is, I think, an example of amazing acting from Marita Sirtis. You have the storyline with Troy where she's hearing this music that's driving her insane. Like, to me, that is the single most terrifying thing I've seen on Next Generation, or maybe films in film and TV in general, the thought, because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, you hear music in your head all the time anyway, but if you really think about it, if you hear the same exact song from start to finish in perfect clarity, repeatedly, non-stop, even when you sleep, that's the most horrifying thing to prospect to me I've ever thought of. Like, I find that more horrifying than the torture in Chain of Command. Like, that is, and so I completely, like, am on board with Troy, where she's screaming, oh my God, stop! Like, that's absolutely, like, one of the most horrific things I can think of, and they put her in a coma. It's horrifying to think that even in the coma, the music didn't go away. And I love, again, they address that Troy has empathic powers, that she could figure out that Kevin Osberg is lying and that he's up to something, and he recognizes that, and so that's why he takes her out. Usually they just conveniently have her forget how to use her powers in an episode, but here they actually use that to a storytelling advantage. And at the end, Picard realizes that Kevin Osberg is the man of conscience, so he's going to erase the music from Troy's mind to save her, and then he confesses to everything, which is a really deep, dark, profound confession, which I thought was like, yeah. So I thought this was absolutely amazing episode. Also, good tea, nice house. Anyway, let me get into my number 9 favorite episode of Next Generation, and that is Chain of Command. This is Chain of Command Part 1 and 2, of course. Very classic TNG episode where you have Picard, Data, and Crusher, not Data, Worf. Picard, Worf, and Crusher going on a mission to infiltrate Cardassian space, and then Jellicoe takes over the Enterprise, and you have the conflict between Riker and Jellicoe. I talked about this already. Jellicoe is a bad captain. Riker was absolutely in the right. Riker deserved to call him arrogant and force him to beg him to do the shuttle mission, because Jellicoe just sucks. They never should have made him the captain in the first place. It was Admiral Chaff's was a bad call on her part to just fuck things up more by forcing in this guy who was like, oh, fuck Dave, Delta shift. You're going to do it into 5 shifts and you can do what I say, blah, 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 which actually hampers the ability of the ship. The ship cannot perform as well when you do shit like that. He's a bad captain. I'm so great seeing Riker put that asshole in his place. But, of course, on top of that, you get the absolute amazing storyline with Jean-Luc Picard getting tortured, which Patrick Stewart really, I think this is the one performance he really put his all into. He said that he researched it because torture was a very important issue to him, and so he gave it his all. He gave it a lot of research. He put a lot of his energy into it. You can tell like he was really playing it, and the fucking dialogue was written so well as well, like the mind games that Picard would say to his torturer, even though his torturer was the one who was physically harming him. Picard knew how to get to him, saying, you're just a 5-year-old boy, weak and helpless. Like, it's just such absolute one of the best performances in Star Trek ever. Absolute amazing, heart-wrenching drama. And on top of that, you did, although as much as I shat on Jellicoe, it was great seeing him get the better of it after constantly getting his ass kicked by the Cardassians in negotiation because they had plotted this whole trap. It was finally great seeing him get the better of them, with Riker's help, by the way, because Jellicoe was humble enough to ask Riker, but of course he had to be a dick about it, as he always was. But anyway, it was great seeing Jellicoe get the better of the Cardassians and plant those bombs on their holes and be like, Mr. Worf. like that was amazing. So it was, all in all, this was absolutely great episode. And again, it's kind of a shame that they never followed up on this and showed Picard's trauma from this incident, but whatever. Still absolute amazing two-parter. Alright now, so let's get into my number 8, getting into another underrated episode, Preemptive Strike, 7th season episode, the penultimate episode of the show that showed, that was Ro Laren's big finale. Now, I mentioned earlier how Ro Laren was actually always one of my favorite characters. I really liked Michelle Forbes. I think she's an amazing actress. And I always liked the character of Ro, who's being slightly haunted. And I love how they brought her back to send off her character, because we hadn't really seen her since season 5. And they explained that she was off doing this tactical training or whatever, and that she went on this undercover mission for the Maquis. And this episode is basically focused entirely on her. This is basically a Ro episode, which I thought was a very bold thing to do for the second to last episode of the whole show. You're going to focus more on a tertiary character that we hadn't really seen in 2 years. But I think it was a great way. It was such one of the most powerful, emotional episodes. I still am steadfast, sturdy in my assertion that this is the best Maquis episode that Star Trek has ever done. It's better than the Maquis on Deep Space Nine. It's better than any Eddington bullshit. It's better than any Chakotay bullshit they did on Voyagers. It's the singular best. Is the moment where you really got a handle on who the Maquis were, and it got you to sympathize with them better. Like in most other DS9 episodes, it seemed like in a bunch of incompetent assholes didn't really know what they were talking about. Where here you really understood their plight. You can understand why people would leave Starfleet to join them, and you understood why Ro did it. They did it from a very personal character perspective. You could completely understand Ro's perspective on how she really related to these people, and she befriended this guy, thought of him as a mentor, and the Cardassians just killed him in cold blood, and the Federation wanted to do nothing about it. Almost makes me want to go up and fight for the Maquis. But the thing that was most heartbreaking about this episode is that she had to let down Picard. That Picard was her mentor first of all, and that he had done so much for her, and that she felt that was, she didn't mind leaving Starfleet. She didn't mind betraying Starfleet. But she minded betraying Picard, and that was the one thing that bothered her. And it was so powerful when Riker told him that, and he was just sitting there like devastated. Again, amazing Patrick Stewart performance. You really felt the weight. That was such an emotional, powerful ending. Very powerful drama. So, anyway, let me now get into my number 7 best episode of Star Trek Next Generation, and that is Reunion. We're getting into this Klingon story arc, and this, of course, is by far the highest. I think it's by far the best. They bring back Kalar, who I already mentioned was an amazing love interest for Worf, and it's just the fact that they brought her back and didn't leave her as a one-off character, and actually had showed that their coupling actually produced a son. Like, that's a risk that usually episodic shows like this would not take. And I love that they took it, but they tied it into this greater story. They introduced Gowron in this episode, and it was a very interesting, suspenseful episode about Klingon intrigue, about how the Romulans are trying to influence the next politician, and Worf is still dealing with the fact he's disincarnated to the point where he can't acknowledge his own son, and how this is driving a wedge between him and Kalar, and this leads Kalar to investigate Worf's background, which leads Doros to kill her in one of the most emotionally powerful scenes in this entire Star Trek franchise, when Worf and Alexander come and find Kalar dying. Like this, and it's great that they call back to this later in Firstborn, which is part of the reason why I put it on my top 50, because it was just such, it should be like a really something that sticks with Alexander for the rest of his life. And then, of course, Worf takes off his comm badge, goes over and fights Doros. Like, fuck, that was just amazing. It was just so powerful. And again, I talked about this before, this performance that Michael Dorn gives when Picard's dressing him down, where Picard is like, you know, the Klingons consider this matter done. They say it's a matter of vengeance. They're all good with it. I'm not. You took off your Starfleet comm badge so you could ignore me, so you could murder someone else. And, you know, and he's like, I'm not okay with this. And Worf, like, again, Michael Dorn's performance here was absolutely amazing. It shows why he's a top quality, top-notch quality actor, where he says, "Sir, I acted within the boundary of Klingon law," and you can tell like his voice is crackling. He's trying really hard to keep it together. It really shows what a huge toll this took on him, and how he's really falling apart, which is his Worf. He's usually stoic, he's together, he's the Iceman, they called him before, who shows no emotion, who's all rigid, and I'm an honorable warrior. But here, he lost his loved one in a very tragic event, and he just killed her murderer, and how all of this is really just, he's falling apart. And it's amazing because how he tries to compose himself. He tries to say a simple, "Oh, sir, I acted within the boundary of Klingon laws," but he can't do it. It's just such amazing acting. It's amazing writing. It's amazing directing. It's just such a great episode overall. All right. So now, let me get into my number 6 favorite episode of Next Generation, and that is Frame of Mind. And I have had, this is a well-liked episode, I will say. On average, most people will agree upon that this is actually a really good episode, but there's a sizable group of people who despise this episode for one reason or another. I have no idea. I will never understand that. This has always been one of my favorite episodes. I personally really love the mind-bendy shit, the stuff that really fucks with your mind, fucks with your sense of reality. I think this is probably one of the best examples of that I've seen in fiction, where Riker keeps switching back and forth from this alien mental institution and the Enterprise, and he doesn't know what's real, what's not. Now, the fact that we know what's real because we know he's a Riker and he's on the Enterprise, that doesn't diminish it, especially since it's actually revealed at the end of the episode that that's actually not real, that none of it's real, that the whole thing is just a fantasy inside of his head, his mind trying to cope with these people trying to break into his mind and steal his secrets. And so his mind is batting himself back and forth between these two different scenarios, and this is the matter that's driving him insane, and how he slowly starts to piece, and it really puts you in the mindset of going insane. And the performances here are just so top notch. The music, again, the music is absolute top notch, and it just gets so mind twisted, particularly at the end where he takes a phaser and he shoots it, and this whole environment crumbles around him, and he starts pushing the doctor guy, and everyone around him starts cheering. That's amazing shit. It's just metaphorical storytelling, mind-twisting storytelling done at its absolute best. It's a masterpiece. It's a brilliance. It's some of the best that Star Trek has ever done. Alright, so now it's time to get into my top 5. So let me start with my number 5, which some people may be surprised it's only at number 5, but it's number 5, so that's a very high one. Yesterday's Enterprise. This is considered to be one of the best episodes of Star Trek Next Generation in general, and for very good reason. It was very unique for its time. It was a really high risk of having and I love how this episode doesn't really hold your hand at all, especially for it being such an early example of this alternate timeline where the Enterprise C comes into a rift and instantly the timelines change, which is how it should be done. And all of a sudden they're in this alternate timeline where they're at war with the Klingons. Everyone's all in uniforms. Tasha Yar is there instead of Wesley, instead of Worf. Actually, no, Wesley's still there, I believe, but Worf isn't there. I love how they don't really hold your hand through that. They don't explain it. They slowly make it evident through the character stories. Through Guinan has this sense that something's wrong, and it leads to some really great, powerful storytelling. And you follow Yar and how she falls in love with the tactical officer from the Enterprise C, Lieutenant Shooter McGavin, and how they hit it off. And you buy it. You buy the romance. You buy you buy that it works. And because they did such a great job following Tashiatsu's episode, you buy that she's devastated to learn that she's dead in the other timeline from a death that had no meaning, and that she wants her death to have meaning. So she wants to help the Enterprise C succeed. And Picard eventually levels with her, and it's okay. You can. And it's just such a powerful journey how Captain Garrett dies and things get worse. They have a lot of doubters like Riker trying to say that this is a stupid mission, but Picard realizes it's their only hope. And it's just such a really great like fight to the finish, one of the best kinds of the fight to the finish type storyline, where the Enterprise D is burning in flames and the Enterprise C is just there. They just need to hold out a little bit longer, and the Klingons surround the Enterprise and say, surrender your ship and prepare to be boarded. And Picard's like, that will be the day, and he just goes down in flames fighting. And then all of a sudden then you see the timeline's restored and everything's good again. Like, it's just such a powerful story. It's done amazingly well here. So definitely one of the best episodes of Next Generation. A very truly unique and risk-taking episode. Yesterday's Enterprise. So, now let's get into my number 4. Getting down here to my 4th favorite episode of the entire Star Trek franchise, and that is Tapestry. Now I think it's kind of demeaning. Some people refer to this as It's a Wonderful Life episode, because I think it's a lot more than just that. And I think it's different enough from that to not call it that. I mean, it is basically getting into it's not like Picard's contemplating suicide. He got killed. But it's just addressing the regrets he had in life. And I think in general, like I've shown this to a couple of people who haven't seen any Star Trek before, and they can really relate to it as a general message about regrets and how people often will let regrets haunt them. Like, oh, I was such an idiot in my youth. I did these idiotic things when I was younger, and wouldn't my life be so much better if I never did it? But here, we get a specific examination where actually, no, your life would have been much worse if you never did those idiotic things. Those idiotic things are part of who you are, and they help shape the person that you became. And it's just, and it was such, again, we get some great use of Q. It's a great Q comedy where it says, is there Jean-Luc Picard here? And just his interactions between Q and Picard throughout this episode are golden. And how Q kind of knows what's going on. He knows the deal. Where Picard still thinks that he's gonna, fix his past, and he ends up just fucking everything up. And Q's like, okay, that's it. You managed to avoid getting stabbed through the heart. There you go. Back to your timeline. And he's this dreary Lieutenant Grau. Like, that was just such a power. I remember being so blown away when I saw that scene. I was like, it's so powerful. That they actually went there, and Picard came to realize that yes, that he would rather die than live the life as that dreary man that he saw there. And then Q gave him the chance to set things right. It was just really well done, really well acted, well put together and everything. So absolute amazing episode, Tapestry. Alright, so next we'll get into my number 3, third best favorite episode of Star Trek Next Generation. That is The Offspring. Always been one of my favorite episodes. I think this is kind of underrated in terms of, I think this is the better sort of android rights episode, even more so than The Measure of a Man, even though I do really like that episode too. I think that it's the more powerful one. It's the more personal one. It's such a great character story from start to finish. It's such an interesting concept too, where Data builds a daughter, or Data has an android, and the ramifications of that, and how Picard's looking at the bigger social implications of it, and Data's like, what? I had a daughter, and is thinking of it as just like a normal situation, and Picard starts to see things through his perspective, and this episode does a great job of building this character, building the relationship between Law and Data, and also getting you to feel a sense of wonder through Law's eyes, how she's learning everything for the first time, and it does it in this lighthearted, humorous way that really works. But then it all builds up to the Admiral asshole guy, who is actually kind of a bit more reasonable as far as asshole admirals go, but still he's kind of an asshole. But you can understand, like, he's not a mustache twirling villain. You can kind of understand his position, but how Picard has to stand up to him, and that was just such an amazing scene. One of the best Picard moments, where Picard is like, where the Admiral orders Data to take his daughter to his ship, but Picard like countermands. He countermands an Admiral. He stands right in the Admiral's face, looks him right in the eye, and says, "No, belay that order, Mr. Data." And the Admiral, you know, of course, is like being steadfast. He's like, "You're risking your whole career here." And Picard is like, "Order a man to hand his daughter over to the state, not while I'm his commanding officer." Oh my God. This is the shit that Star Trek is made for. This is what the Next Generation was made for. This is what it does so best. What a great moment. But that leads to the really tragic moment where daughters die, where Law dies, and I don't care what anyone says, this is one of the most tear-jerking. I will proudly admit I had bawled my eyes out several times while watching this episode, because it's earned. It is so incredibly well earned, because they really built up that connection between Data and Law. They really got you to see through her eyes and see, I feel it. And that moment where she starts to cascade and she has to say goodbye to Data. And she says, "I love you, Father." And he's like, I'm sorry, but I can't love you back. And he's like, "I will love you for the both of us." It's just, and because you know that's not entirely true. And I think Troy or someone else points that out when Data says, "I can never love her back." He's like, well, I don't buy that, though. I don't think it's entirely true, because I think Data does and love people in his own way. And he absolutely does. And you can tell that, how at the end he says that he transferred Law's memories to himself. So he knows what it's like to experience those things. And damn, it was just one of the most tragic, most emotional moments ever. It's just, all in all, it's well directed, well acted, just amazing episode. And it really does get into the androids' rights of how they just wanted to treat them like property because they're androids, but they deserved, the mother deserved, or the father deserved to raise the daughter just like any human parents would. And it had that very tragic, very heartfelt, well-earned ending. So now let's get into my number 2, my second favorite episode of Star Trek Next Generation. And that is All Good Things, which, if you're familiar with my channel, may surprise you, because previously this has been my number 1. This time I'm putting it at number 2, which I know some people might find surprising, but ultimately did decide to make the swap to number 2. Now, this is almost the quintessential Star Trek Next Generation episode that embodies everything Next Generation is about. It's got time travel, it's got Romulans, it's got personal character exploration, it's got Q, and it does it all really, really well, and a really well developed script from start to finish that really explores these different characters and their aspect, and does Picard's time travel. His personal character journey, of course, is the chief thing among this episode that it pulls off amazingly well. And oh yes, by the way, it's also the final episode of the show, and it manages to be one of the best final episodes of a show that any show has ever done. Usually most shows that try to do final episodes fail at it. Like, this gets the formula just right. It honors everything that came before it, and also, you know, by showing this possible future, and just having a great character story. And again, this is another really great use of Q. I love how Q doesn't even show up till halfway through the episode, but when he does, he's really menacing. And then he says those final lines that he says to Picard about exploring the unknown realities, or the unknown something of existence. I always fuck up that quote, but it's a great quote. And it really is what Next Generation is all about. And Plus, like, it's just such a really suspenseful episode storyline. It's just really well constructed. How things get worse and worse, and it's great how people think Picard's crazy at first. Like, I love the scenes with him in the future. It's like, they're laughing at me. Why are they laughing at me? But more and more, he like starts to figure it out, and he puts it all together, and the band gets back together for one last venture. You have those 3 versions of the Enterprise and the Anomaly trying to fuck it up while Q is just messing with his head. It's like, this is perfect. It's like the perfect way to end Star Trek Next Generation. Now, why this is not my number 1 anymore, I think it has more to do with what I do think is now my number 1 than it does this episode. But also, this episode has Worf and Troy. It's a small thing, but I think that whole Worf, and particularly how it pertains to this episode, I thought was dumb. Those two have no business being together, and the fact they played it, that Troy died in the future and Worf and Riker ended up hating each other. That's a storyline that always annoyed me, and their scenes, Worf and Troy scenes together in this episode, I thought were really stupid. Those two have no business to being together, and the show very smartly course corrected that immediately, and had Worf marry Dax instead, which was a much better choice, and just forgot about this whole Troy thing and had Troy marry Riker eventually, which is what she should have done anyway. So I do hold that against this episode a smidgen, which left room for this number 1 to sneak in, which I do have to admit I did appreciate a hell of a lot more on my rewatch. Now, I always loved this episode. This was always a top 5 episode for me. Well, maybe not always, but at least in the past 20 years, it's been a top 5 episode for me. Apparently, I didn't appreciate this episode very much the very first time it came out because I was too young. It wasn't until later where I really learned to appreciate it. And I am referring to my number 1 best episode of Star Trek Next Generation, The Inner Light. Now, this is a fan favorite episode, and for very good reason. Some people have it at number 1. I think most people would just have it in their top 5. But on my rewatch, I realized that this is pretty much the perfect episode. I mean, it does have some flaws in it too, like the whole, well, how can this species that could barely launch probes into space reconfigure an alien's mind thousands of years in the future? Okay. So it does have some flaws, but that's kind of like you hand wave that away and just forget about that. It is like the perfect drama story. I mean, it's the perfect character exploration for Picard. I mean, the way the whole story unfolds from start to finish, where Picard meets his wife and he's like, oh, who the fuck are you? What are you doing here? Why are you holding me here? And years passed and he learns to see it has his real life, and that other life on the starship was just some ghost life. But then you realize it hasn't been years and years. It's just been 20 minutes, and it's just had a lifetime of memories thrown at him in that short span, and how he grown, how he raised a family. I mean, the whole structure of the episode, how it focuses on the really important bits that really help define this character and his family life. That's a tricky thing, because this is a whole lifetime, and they could have chose to focus on any one part of his life, but the way they did it was absolutely masterfully done, in order to really, because the Bataille character, he barely appears in the episode, and yet you do feel his loss. You feel it because the character of Picard, or Bataille, or not Bataille's the friend, what's this called? Kamen, that's his name, Kamen. The character of Kamen feels it, so you feel it because Patrick Stewart is that good of a fucking actor. He just does an absolutely amazing job in this episode. And by the end, when they reveal that, because you also get the feel for their plight, that their planet's dying, there's a drought, and he's trying to do something about it, he can't do anything about it, and they reveal that this already happened thousands of years ago, and this was just the probe that he discovered. Like, god damn. That was some really powerful shit, especially when his wife appears young, and his whole family, and Bataille, they all appear to him again, hold hands and say, teach us, tell them about us. You're that teacher. And that was just, It was so amazing. And then when Picard goes back to the Enterprise, he's so overwhelmed by his experience. He can't comprehend that it's only been 20 minutes. And it's like he hasn't seen Riker and Crusher in a lifetime. And then that very simple, beautiful scene, which was the absolute perfect way. It shows how this was a perfectly written, directed, executed episode. Because there's many ways they could have done this that would have been cliche or would have fucked things up or that would have ruined the mood. But they did the most powerful thing. They just had Picard take out the flute and play it. And that is, again, I have to admit, to tearing up quite a few times on that scene. It is one of the most powerful uses of music in fiction ever. It's not just Star Trek, any TV, movie, any visual medium. One of the most powerful uses of music, one of the most subtle, the most emotional, the most impactful. It was simply beautiful. And so after watching this and seeing the pure beauty in this episode and just how masterfully constructed it is, I realized that this had to be my new #1 favorite episode of Star Trek Next Generation, The Inner Light. So that is it for my top 50 best episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. I want to thank you so much for sitting through this very long video for that, where I gush about all these my favorite episodes, some fan favorites, some that people don't think are that great or deserve to be on here, and I'm sure I forgot some others that some other people like that I don't like as much. But regardless, that is it. That is my top 50 favorite episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, and that is it for my coverage of Star Trek Next Generation. So if you haven't watched it all, I would recommend going back and watching. I covered every season of Star Trek Next Generation, every episode, one season at a time, so you can go back and watch those videos. And so thus concludes my coverage of Star Trek Next Generation, and next month I will return to cover Breaking Bad. Not a Star Trek show. I know some people are going to be disappointed, but it's a show I want to cover next. Another show that I'm really looking forward to diving into. So be sure to join me for that journey as well. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out my channel as I cover many more Star Trek shows, including Lower Decks, The Expanse, The Boys, BoJack Horseman, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.